Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today I want to share with you how to do some shadow stenciling. So I've done shadow stamping before. This is the same thing, just with stenciling. But first I want to remind you to follow me across social media if you haven't already. Those links will be in the description box below. I'm hoping to get back into the swing of things now that I'm feeling much better. Also, while you're down there, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to my channel. And if you enjoy this video, the thumbs up button always helps. I am using this stencil from the Crafters Workshop. All the supplies, everything I'm using today, it's all going to be listed down there. So if you have any questions or if you want to purchase some of these yourself, you can find all the links down there in the description box. I am starting off with a piece of heavyweight white cardstock and I'm taping it down to the back of my stencil. I like to do this because then I don't have to start out with a larger piece of cardstock. It's just my lazy way of getting around having to trim it down later on. So my cardstock measures about 3.5 inches by 5.5. I place that stencil over the top of it and now I'm going to start sponging through some ink. I am using the VersaFine Clear ink. I'm starting off with this Monarch color, which is a beautiful, beautiful purple. And then I'll come in on the tops of these flowers and add some Rainforest ink, which is a dark green color. I'm using a makeup sponge that I've cut in half so I get 2 uses out of it and I don't have to waste a bunch of the sponge itself. That's just a nice way to get a little bit more use out of something that's already cheap so you get even more mileage out of it. I am going into all those little tight spaces. If you ever feel like you're getting into a teeny tiny tight space, just scrunch up your makeup sponge or cut it down even more and then go into those tight spaces and that'll help you get into there. Now I am using a pigment ink because I will be embossing over this in just a moment once I get it all covered with ink. If you do not have a pigment ink pad, you can still do this technique. All you need to do is use your dye inks first. Go ahead and fill in the color of the stencil. Then clean off your stencil a little bit so you don't gunk up your embossing ink pad, but then take your embossing ink pad and just smoosh it over the top of the stencil, going through that with the embossing ink, and that's going to give you that nice clear sticky layer over the top of your dye ink. Your color's still going to show through. You're just going to have a place where you can grab onto that embossing powder. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the green color and start filling that in. Now VersaFine Clear ink is, it doesn't mix with water at all, so cleaning this off your stencil can be a little bit tricky. At the very end of this video, I'm going to share with you how I clean it off and how I get another background out of all that leftover ink that's on there, so stick around. And then on the 14th, I have a video where I'm actually using the background that I made on another card. So if you come back on the 14th, you'll see that too. But I'm going to go ahead and finish up the green, and then just to make sure I've got a nice wet layer over the purple so my embossing powder sticks, I'm going to go ahead and smush some through very, very quickly just for a nice little touch up. Then I'll be sprinkling over some clear embossing powder. Again, if you don't have that dye ink, just come back in with Versamark ink over the top of your dye ink, and that's going to give you that nice sticky layer so you can put on your clear embossing powder, and you can use then either or inks. I'll go ahead and heat set that very quickly. You do want to make sure this is nice and heat set because we are going to be ink blending over the top of this, so you don't want any little stray powders that are going to move around on you. So make sure it's good and heat set. Also, before you put your stencil down, you can prep your surface. I didn't here and I didn't have any problems, but if you live in a very dry climate, you're probably going to want to prep your surface. Now, I am going to go ahead and take that same stencil and put it right back over where I stenciled beforehand. It's super easy to line up. Then I'll go ahead and move it slightly to the right and slightly down. You're going to see it. It's going to look very weird. It's going to look off, and when I put ink over this, it's going to look even weirder, but I promise once it comes off, it looks beautiful. So I'll go ahead and tape this down. I'm taping it to my paper and to the stencil to make sure nothing is going to move around. Now for this part, I'm going to switch to a dye ink. I tried a pigment ink when I first did this technique, and I thought the pigment ink was just a little bit too much. The dye ink soaks into the paper, it softens up a little bit, it looks more like a shadow. So I would suggest using a dye ink for this portion, but if you only have a pigment ink, it will work. It's just going to be a lot starker of a shadow. I'm using my makeup brushes to go ahead and put through this layer of ink. You can use anything. You can use a makeup sponge or a finger dauber, whatever you have on hand to get that color through. It really is up to you. I just happen to really love these. I've done a review on them. I'll leave that linked in the top right-hand corner for you if you want to check that out. I'll go ahead and just continue to put that through very, very quickly, making sure that stencil's not moving around. And then every once in a while, I'm going to check it. I didn't want to put a lot of ink through because you do want this to be a lighter layer. But once I was happy with it, I can go ahead and peel up that stencil, and this looks so neat. It creates this gorgeous shadow. It makes the flowers look even more realistic. It just adds an extra something to this stenciled background that I'll be using, and I think it only takes a few seconds to do. Adding that layer of embossing powder and then that little bit of gray ink really helps it just pop off the card. Absolutely love the way this turned out. And there you can see that dye ink. It just kind of soaks into the paper. It's a little bit softer than your pigment ink. So using the two kind of inks may be a little bit bothersome, but I happen to love the way that looks. So for my sentiment, I'm going to be using this new deco foil, the flocking sheets. This die cuts really well, and I love the velvety texture of it. So I wanted to use it on this card. I'm using the black color. I thought it looked really, really kind of elegant in there. And I'm using this hang in there die from Altenew to go ahead and die cut. Now there are a couple ways you could go about making this sentiment that I'm making. First of all, you could take a piece of black cardstock, add over a layer of adhesive, and then die cut it. Then you can put on your flock over the adhesive. However, I find it easier just to go ahead and die cut the flocking sheet itself. It die cuts really nicely. I ran it through once and then back through, and I had no problems poking out all those little pieces in there. You are going to get a little bit of a white on the edge just from the backing paper is white, and it is a little bit slick. So you're going to want to use a strong adhesive whenever you glue it to something, but other than that, I find it easier just to die cut the sheet itself. For the background, I'm going to go ahead and add just some black strips of cardstock on either side of that panel. Very, very thin ones, just to help it pop away from the card panel or the card base itself. White on white is always a little bit, it gets a little lost in there. So I find adding that black little bitty strip helps it pop away. Now I use that same hang in there die. I die cut it several times, about 5 times from black cardstock, and stack those all up on each other. I'm using this glue that is, it's the On Point glue from Imagine. Excuse my head. It was having its day. It wanted to be in the camera too. I guess my hair had a little crazies in the front. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that glue right on that chipboard that I've made myself, and then I'll go ahead and put on the hang in there with the foil or with the flocking on it. Like I said, use a strong adhesive. This backing paper on that is a little bit slick, so you want to make sure it's nice and strong on there. And then I just place a heavy acrylic block on top of it so it can dry. But it doesn't, like, you know how foam kind of stretches out and stuff? It doesn't do anything funky. It die cuts. It holds its shape. It's great. So I'll go ahead and add some fun foam or foam tape on the back of my panel, and I'm going to pop that right up onto an A2 top folding white card base in the center. And you can see how those black strips just kind of help it pop away from that card base. Now here's a nice close-up of the actual chipboard type of sentiment that I made just by layering up all those die cuts. It takes a few minutes, but it's so worth it, and then I don't have to mess with the foam tape, the little bitty pieces on the back. I find this so much easier. There you can see that little bit of a white edge you get from leaving it on the backing paper. If you want to avoid that, just die cut from adhesive and apply the flock that way. I'll have a video all about this product coming up. but for today, I just die cut it super duper simple. I went ahead and applied some adhesive right on the back of that. Same adhesive I used before, the Imagine On Point glue, and I will pop that right down in the center. Then using that same glue, I'm going to put down some silver jewels. These are from Cat Scrappiness. I love these. There are 4 different sizes in the package. The package has a ton of different jewels in it, and there are so many different colors. I mean, there's a rainbow set, a clear set, every color of the rainbow set. They're gorgeous. I went ahead and added a few of those around the sentiment, and that finished off the card. So here are a few final looks at the card itself, but like I said before, I did clean off my stencil a different way to get that VersaFine clear ink off, and I made a background with it. So I'll show you how I did that very, very quickly before I go. So to clean this off, before I used water, you don't want to use water. It's just going to smear around. It's not going to really go anywhere. I used just some alcohol, regular plain rubbing alcohol that I bought at my local store, and I give it a really generous spray, kind of let it meld with the ink, react with it a little bit. Then I'm going to take just this piece of cardstock that I had on hand, and I'm going to flip it over. I didn't even think I'd be using this as a background, but I love the way it turned out. I'm just going to press that down very, very gently. I don't want to smush it too much. I don't want it going through the openings of the stencil. So I'll just place that down and then place the cloth on top of it. Just hold it in place. Let that ink absorb into the paper. Now this is alcohol that I'm using here, so it's going to make the cardstock almost look transparent at first. It's going to look ugly, but once it dries, it is gorgeous. And I've used this on a card already, so I will share that on the 14th, so make sure you come back and check that out. But that is going to do it for me today. One final look at this card that I made today with the regular stenciling. And that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching today. There are going to be links on the left side of your screen you can click on. You can also subscribe to my channel over there. Don't forget all the information down in the description box below. Happy crafting, everyone.